This money that we're talking about is taxpayer dollars. This is U.S. taxpayer dollars that's going to an organization that has ties to terrorists at a time of heightened alarm over terrorist activities around the world and even right here at home. As you know, we love investigative journalism, real investigative journalism, not, people who work for the Washington Post who get handed a manila envelope by somebody who works at the FBI and then they publish it even though it's all fake because it's about Russia and Trump. Not that kind of investigative journalism, real investigative journalism. And one of our favorite investigative journalists working out there right now is Gabe Kaminsky over at the Washington Examiner, and he's got a bombshell. Gabe Kaminsky, thank you for joining us on this story that just broke this morning, right?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Larry.
All right, so let's lay this out here. We already know that the Biden administration made unbelievable judgment errors in releasing funds to the country of Iran, and that money then went to fund terrorists. And we know that they freed up money for Hamas at the Gaza Strip. But now you have found more money going to terrorists, even though the administration was warned about this organization. Is that right? Lay this out for me.
Yeah. So as you said, of course, there's heightened scrutiny with regard to cash domestically in the U.S., right, being funneled to foreign entities that are either linked to terror or in Gaza Strip, which is controlled by Hamas. But yeah, our story this morning details basically the Inspector General for the U.S. Agency for International Development. It's the top foreign aid agency in the U.S., dispersing large sums of money each year overseas for initiatives Republicans often aren't too fond about. The Inspector General for that agency quietly last year launched an investigation into a $110,000 grant in 2021 to a charity in Michigan called Helping Hand for Relief and Development. And that actually raised the concerns at the time, or actually rather last year, of Republicans on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And the reason for that is because Helping Hand for Relief and Development has various actual ties to terrorism. And just to give you an example, it's partnered in various occasions with a group in Pakistan called Falah in Siniat, which is a partner of a separate Pakistani designated foreign terrorist organization. And just one other example to give you of this charity, it is partnered with a group called Jamaat-e-Islami, which is a Islamist foundation whose charity arm has actually wired money directly to Hamas. Helping Hand for Relief and Development, the Biden administration funded group, has funded that group in turn. So all that to say, there are legitimate terror ties that have been on the radar of lawmakers. And that we found that the Inspector General actually began looking into this after Republicans raised concerns over it. But that actually didn't stop the Biden administration after that investigation was already open from sending $78,000 in separate money to this same foundation, as there was already, documented reporting about those terror ties. And so that's something, we spoke to some lawmakers and former federal officials who say that the fact that USAID's Inspector General would investigate the agency proper for a grant as small as $110,000 shows that they recognize this is really a problem.
So let's unpack this here. Helping Hand and Relief, that's a Michigan-based charity or agency or private NGO, I guess. And we already know that they have ties to overseas terror operations. I want to get to that in a minute. USAID, that's the government agency. And you said the Inspector General of USAID, they quietly started an investigation of this grant from a year ago. But when you say quietly, you mean it didn't get a lot of media attention. But there's no doubt that the administrators of USAID, the Biden administration, the State Department, they knew that this investigation was going forward, right? Inspector General, generally speaking, alerts these people that something's being investigated. They can't claim ignorance here, can they?
So actually, when I say quietly, I meant this is the first time anyone's reported on the Inspector General investigation. It hasn't been publicized before. And I'm not sure who's been made aware of it in the past. I had reached out to various people on the Hill who seemed completely ignorant to the fact that could have been going on. And I think a part of that is Inspector Generals offices operate independently from agencies and sort of operate in a covert fashion. But certainly, USAID was aware itself that the Inspector General had launched an investigation into its grant in 2021 to this nonprofit group, right?
Okay.
And USAID, uh, they technically could have postponed their follow-up grant to this charity, but they decided not to.
Yeah. So USAID knows that there's an investigation at the Inspector General level about this last grant that they gave Helping Hands in Michigan because of their terror ties, and they just go ahead and give more money to them. And by the way, this is in light of the terror attacks on October 7th in Israel. Samantha Power, if I remember right, is actually in charge of USAID. People might remember her as the ambassador to the UN under Barack Obama, right?
Yeah, right. She's the USAID administrator. So Samantha Power is the head USAID official, and she's the individual that in January 2023 had received a letter from the House Foreign Affairs Committee asking USAID to suspend its grant over to Helping Hands over what they said were credible allegations that the group is associated with terror organizations.
Yeah.
Um,
And,
so certainly on her radar.
and I just want to make sure that everybody understands here, because we're talking about this organization, USAID. It's a government agency. This money that we're talking about is taxpayer dollars. This is U.S. taxpayer dollars that's going to an organization that has ties to terrorists at a time of heightened alarm over terrorist activities around the world and even right here at home.
Right. And I think the thing to emphasize here is so USAID is giving money to this group that has pretty obvious issues overseas. We looked at other participants in the same grant program that USAID gave money to, and they're actually they're legitimate organizations. They're groups like World Help, which is a Christian humanitarian group, or a Jewish volunteer group called Hadassah, or certain groups in Jerusalem. I'm not saying all these grantees, I don't know where they align morally or politically,
Yeah.
but they're not, we haven't found documented ties to terrorists, right?
We know
Just
they're not connected to terrorists. Let's
right,
start
at
there
least
as the baseline. Yeah.
yeah, that's the baseline, right? So that's what we're aware of, and so clearly this is a problem, right? And that's something that we heard from people in Congress and foreign policy experts, right? But that didn't stop, 6 months after USAID's investigation began, from saying, "Oh, well, let's send more taxpayer dollars to this group that lawmakers told us and has been documented as linked to groups murdering people."
Yeah, there's another part of this story, I think, that it isn't necessarily in your article this morning, Gabe, but I think it's worth exploring. And that is, after the attacks of September 11th, it was discovered through various investigations that there were domestic organizations, nonprofits, NGOs, who did have ties to Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. That became the focus of many prosecutions after those investigations during the Bush administration. You would think that we would still be on high alert about this sort of thing, that there should still be extra scrutiny here. If these guys are on the radar, I mean, listen, it's bad enough that the Biden administration is just willy-nilly giving them tax dollars, Gabe, even after they know they're being investigated right now. But at the same time, shouldn't there be a criminal investigation here? Or are you aware if there is a criminal investigation over an organization tied to terrorists?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any criminal investigation. I mean, the USAID Inspector General has statutory law enforcement power, subpoena power, and they could bring in the Department of Justice into their investigation. I mean, one notable thing I'd say is in 2019, a man named Fareed Ahmed Khan was found guilty by a Connecticut jury of making false statements to the FBI in connection to a terrorism financing investigation about being affiliated with this charity funded by the Biden administration and an affiliated group. He went to prison, and I'm actually not sure if he's still in prison. It's kind of unclear his whereabouts right now, believe it or not.
Hmm.
But all that is to say, I think you said, since 9/11, there's been heightened scrutiny over terror-linked charities, and that's certainly that's a real problem because as you've seen, I think the tip of the iceberg, right? Decades in 2002, the Holy Land Foundation,
That's
a
right.
charity, was prosecuted, and the Justice Department basically shut this charity down, saying that it was funneling money to Al Qaeda and boosting Osama bin Laden. And since that time, it seems like there's been a lack of oversight in the IRS and other agencies. The Holy Land Foundation has essentially reincorporated into other charities that now share staff of the Holy Land Foundation, places like American Muslims for Palestine, where Attorney General Jason Myers is now investigating them over those sort of allegations. So there's certainly many charities like HHRD, and the government has no problem funding them.
Yeah, that's Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares. He's not U.S. Attorney General quite yet,
Oh,
though.
yeah.
But he didn't specify. I want to make sure people do.
Yeah.
Also, and you're right, there are organizations like that who are also supporting and funding some of the atrocious pro-Hamas terrorist protests that we're seeing, either on college campuses or in our city streets. All of these things are organized. We can tell they've got printed signs and all of that jazz. You said that there were members of Congress who weren't actually aware of this. But has anyone on Capitol Hill responded to your report yet? And do they plan on a congressional investigation, for what it's worth?
Yeah. So, I mean, we saw the House Foreign Affairs Committee, right? They had looked into that 2021 grant. I reached out to them to see if they were looking into that 2023 grant. They had declined to comment on that front. So I'm not sure where it stands as far as looking into the follow-up money. They might view it as sort of connected to their initial investigation, and maybe it's kind of been passed along to the Inspector General, who's now looking into this grant. But certainly there seems to be, potential interest among certain lawmakers like Darrell Issa in looking into this. Darrell Issa's, a member who has long time been focused on, terror-related issues and anti-Israel matters. So I think he's a lawmaker to watch, and I also think that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, this really would be their jurisdiction as well.
Yeah,
lawmakers like Ted Cruz are on that, or Marsha Blackburn.
well, you're right. In the Darrell Issa, former chairman of the House Oversight Committee, if he's got you on your in his sights, he's definitely going to scrutinize you and put in a thorough investigation. Gabe, I think that your story will probably actually move it along as well, and we should expect an investigation. One last question: the USAID, this agency that is responsible for, again, granting U.S. tax dollars to an organization already being investigated for ties to terrorists overseas in Gaza. Is this under the umbrella of the State Department? Is this on Antony Blinken's watch?
Well, so USAID works closely with the State Department. 2024 budget-wise, they both received, I believe it was about something like $60 billion combined from Congress through appropriations. State Department and USAID work together closely in regions like India or any numbers. So I'd hope that the State Department is aware of this Inspector General investigation. I reached out to USAID. We sent them a detailed list of questions weeks ago. They responded to our initial email and then pretty much did not respond to several follow-ups. So I haven't been able to get any clarity out of them.
Well, I think you've been doing this long enough to know that when they stop responding, it means you're on the right trail. So we'll trust that you'll continue to pursue it. Gabe Kaminsky, thank you for giving us the details on this disconcerting report.